You think the worst thing about a Victorian hospital was the surgery, right? Wrong. The surgery was maybe the fourth worst thing. The absolute worst, the thing that hits you before the rattling iron gates even scrape shut, is the air. Thick, wet, like old fermented laundry mixed with burnt sugar, and that deep, metallic copper tang of drying blood, layered over cold, piss-stained floorboards. You walk in, and you haven't even met the surgeon yet, but you already know you're already dead. It wasn't a small, cozy infirmary. Forget that. These places, the big city ones, St. Thomas's, the London Hospital, they were built like industrial cathedrals. Massive red brick, stone facades that mocked the suffering inside with their sheer monumental piety. Cold. Always cold. Even on a July afternoon, the air currents generated by those 20-foot ceilings were designed to drag the heat right out of your collapsing lungs. That was the miasma theory architecture. Gotta air out the bad smells, right? Except the smells just got colder and hung around longer. You are dropped, literally, onto a slab of flagstone floor, or maybe a worn pine plank, slick with the patina of old polish and human effluvia. The soundproofing is non-existent. You hear everything. The wet, hacking, consumptive coughs echoing down the main corridor like mortar fire. The rhythmic, awful scraping sound that might be a saw or just a porter dragging a bucket of God knows what. It sounds like work. Hard, messy, necessary work. The light is the next thing. Huge windows, sure, built high up near the ceiling to try and mimic some kind of celestial purity. But the glass is perpetually smeared with coal soot and that brownish residue you don't want to think about. A permanent, jaundiced yellow gloom coats the wards. It feels like 4 in the morning, even if it's noon on an October Tuesday, 1864. Specific date matters because every day counts against you, and the wards themselves. Long, impossibly long halls packed tight with beds, 19 patients minimum to a row, separated by maybe 18 inches of bare floorboard that hasn't seen proper soap since Queen Victoria had fewer grandchildren. Look closer at the bedding. Those aren't pristine white linens. They are thick, rough, scratchy blankets. Gray wool, maybe, stained permanently rust brown or green from previous occupants' fluids. They are reused. Why wouldn't they be? You think they had efficient laundry services running 24/7 in a world where clean water was often a pipe dream? You are just a body. Another statistic waiting for the sepsis to kick in. Because the beds were just the waiting room. The actual horror show started when the attending came in. Not pristine white uniforms. They wore heavy woolen coats, maybe a leather apron, less for sanitation, more to protect their own clothes from the spray. They weren't heroes. They were high-functioning butchers who smelled perpetually of stale gin, sweat, and that cloying sweetness of rot mixed with carbolic acid, if they were progressive, which 90% weren't. And they moved fast. Fast was the key. Not because they cared about your feelings, but because speed was their only viable substitute for pain relief that actually worked. 5 minutes for an amputation. Anything longer, and the patient might fight too hard, might seize, might bleed out while trying to crawl off the table, which, by the way, was usually just a sturdy wooden dining table, slightly tilted towards the drain. The implements. Oh God, the implements. Think about modern surgical tools. Sealed, gleaming, aerospace-grade stainless steel. These were carbon steel, dull, nicked. Stored in a mahogany box, often nestled in velvet, a perverse relic of the gentleman surgeon's pride. Never boiled, maybe wiped down with a scrap of bloody lint if the surgeon remembered, but often just used, wiped on the surgeon's apron, and placed back in the box, waiting for the next femur. That sound. You're lying there, perhaps strapped down with leather restraints that chafe your already feverish skin, and you hear the scrape. Not the whine of a modern electric saw, the deep, heavy shunk, shunk of a bone saw dragging through periosteum. It's a sound that travels right up the spine. The pain is physical, yes, but the sound is psychological warfare. It tells every patient in that 80-foot ward exactly what is happening, and that they are next. And the floor. After the procedure, the blood, the sheer volume of it, was often absorbed by buckets of rough, damp sawdust tossed around the operating theater. Blood and tissue fragments and the occasional tooth all mixed into this foul, wet slurry. Then maybe a porter would sweep it out, or maybe not until the evening rounds. So you lay there, breathing air thick with the metallic steam of your neighbor's fresh trauma, watching the brownish-red puddles slowly seep toward your own cot. This is the point where you realize your injury wasn't the threat. Your doctors are the delivery system. Look, this historical dive is visceral. It smells terrible. It feels awful. If you're still here, still listening to the creak of the surgical table and the distant, thin moan of a man who just had his gangrenous foot taken off without ether, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button. It's a small, non-infectious way to support the channel and make sure we keep unearthing the absolute worst parts of history. We're deep in the muck now, and the muck gets deeper. The post-operative care was the finishing move. Let's talk about wound dressing. Forget sterile gauze pads individually wrapped. They used lint. Old rags collected from who knows where, perhaps torn up from used clothing, maybe even scraped from industrial waste, which was then scraped clean of previous pus and blood by nurses or even the patients themselves. They called this repurposed material, or charpy. Imagine packing an open, festering stump with fragments of previously infected cotton. It's a biological guarantee. It's an instruction manual for erysipelas. The wounds, of course, were kept open. They believed the laudable pus must flow. They thought infection, that yellowish-green discharge that smelled like week-old cheese left in the sun, was a sign of healing. It was the body cleansing itself. Wait, no, that's not right. That's horrifyingly wrong. That pus was streptococcus, staphylococcus, and every other deadly coccus known to man, multiplying exponentially in the warm, damp environment of the large ward. The smell of the gangrene was distinct. Not just generic decay. It had a sweet, almost fruity undertone, often described as similar to overripe apples or musky earth, overlaid with the penetrating, acrid stench of human waste that was rarely removed efficiently. Because the chamber pots, often ceramic, heavy, chipped, were stacked at the end of the ward, waiting for a single porter to haul them through all 19 rows of beds. And you, the patient, were too weak, too feverish, maybe too recently missing a limb, to navigate the 18 inches of space to relieve yourself. So, sometimes, the blankets absorbed the mess, and the rough gray wool held on to it, permanently. You'd feel the fever spike around day 3, the shakes would start. You'd look down at your limb, or what was left of it, and the area around the dressing would be swollen, hot to the touch, and turning a deep, angry purple. The nurse, usually overworked and undertrained, might shrug. "It's only the fever, dearie. The laudable pus is working." But you know the truth, don't you? You hear the rattling coughs getting closer. You see the screens being brought around the bed 2 cots down. The screens meant they knew the final outcome was imminent, and they wanted the corpse to be discreet. You wouldn't survive the night because the entire system was designed as a closed-loop biological weapon. The beds infected the nurses infected the tools infected the sawdust infected the air, and the air just recirculated the entire mess back into your collapsing lungs. It wasn't incompetence, really. It was ignorance combined with massive industrial-scale poverty, where throwing away a perfectly good, if pus-soaked, rag was seen as reckless waste. You were simply a vessel for cross-contamination, a warm bag of nutrient-rich fluids waiting for the inevitable microbial feast. The lamp flickers. Tallow smoke, greasy and thick, chokes the high ceiling. You try to sit up, cannot. Your muscles are soup. Your mouth is desert sand. Thirst is secondary now. Fear is primary, because you hear the sound upstairs. Clink. That's the surgeon's liston knife hitting the wooden preparation table. Wait, not marble. Just thick pine, scrubbed raw, stained a permanent deep maroon by decades of bloodletting and rushed amputations. They are prepping someone. Maybe the boy who started convulsing at 3 a.m. Or maybe they are coming for you. The floorboards above your head start vibrating. A slow, steady thump, thump, thump. Then a wet, sickening, resonant sound, a dreadful sawing. Everyone here knows that noise. It's the sound of thick bone meeting dull steel, amplified by the vast, echoing geometry of the great ward. Someone screams, not a theatrical yell, muffled, short, a choked, guttural sound held down by 2 orderlies. Then the scream dissolves into a rapid, wet gurgle, like water going down a drain too fast. Silence. But the scent changes. A sharp, sweet chemical blast cuts clean through the decay. Chloroform. Or maybe just cheap industrial ether. It means the surgeon is doing God's work. Or maybe Satan's. That anesthetic is poured liberally onto a cone, but the heavy, intoxicating fumes drift down the wide, open stairwell, mixing with the ammonia and the death sweat. You breathe it in. It burns your throat. It makes the fever feel worse, fuzzier, dissociative. You watch the ward porter walk past, slowly. He's dragging a canvas sheet, something heavy inside, too short to be an adult. The sheet is dark with the fluids soaked through the cheap fabric. He doesn't look at you. Nobody looks at anyone. You just wait for the next floor vibration, and you pray the next scream isn't yours. But the deep, ugly purple spreading across your stitched stump tells a different, undeniable story. It's already writing your epitaph in necrosis. The air itself is toxic, a slow, cold suffocation. We study 1860 not to feel better about 2024. History isn't self-improvement. It's just evidence that mass suffering is the default setting. You would have been just as terrified, just as dead. Dying here was less a possibility and more a mathematical certainty. You want gratitude? Don't. Just be glad you aren't smelling that reek of cheap tallow and stale urine right now. Wait, it wasn't always urine. Sometimes it was just bad beer the orderlies were drinking. Details matter. Tell me your worst fear in the comments.